Good morning. We look today at 2 Chronicles chapter 30 and 31, continuing the reign of Hezekiah. We'll finish Hezekiah's reign tomorrow and then move on into the next king. But King Hezekiah was one who, as we talked yesterday, was faithful to God. And he sends word to all of Israel that they should come to Jerusalem and observe the Passover. They hadn't done that for years. And so this Passover that King Hezekiah calls the people to isn't talked about in Kings at all, but it was Josiah that we read about in 2 Kings, I think, is one of the Kings books anyway, that had celebrated the Passover. Yeah, but Hezekiah calls the people from all of Israel, not just from Judah, but he sends messengers to all of Israel, to all of the communities of the northern kingdom, southern kingdom. He doesn't hold anything back. He sends an invitation to each and every community, to each and every of the tribes of Israel to come and celebrate, observe the Passover, as had been instructed by Moses, by God to Moses, through Moses and Aaron that way. And the invitation is there for all. And I think about this invitation for all people to come to the Passover, whether they're northern kingdom, southern kingdom, whether they've been faithful to God or not. The invitation is there. Same thing as when we celebrate Holy Communion. I mean, the invitation is for all. I'll talk more about that in a little bit maybe. But as he sends these messengers out, many of the other communities, many of the other tribes, the other kingdom, just, shake their heads and whoop-de-doo, and just brush it off. But he sent these couriers with letters from the king and his officials, inviting, saying, let's turn back to God as a nation. And many were just laughed at. It says they were laughed to scorn in verse 10. And mocked. Only in verse 11, only a few from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came. So only people from 3 of the other tribes, came. So, with the Judah, 4 out of the 11 tribes that were scattered around decided to come, and probably not so awful many from those other 3 tribes, or communities. But when they came for the Feast of Unleavened, for the Passover, Passover was usually held in the first month, but there weren't enough priests that were sanctified. They were cleansed. They were ceremoniously clean. There weren't enough priests in order to do it the first month. So he says, well, let's do it the second month. And, you first read that and then you wonder, well, is God going to be happy about that, or is God going to reject that? But he realizes that it's not the right month, but he sets to it anyway. And they do. There were enough priests that were cleansed and everything to be able to perform the rituals. For the most part, the Levites had to help with some of the preparation of the sacrificial lamb and everything. But they came. And it tells us that not all of the people had cleansed themselves. And this ritual cleansing, it makes me think of Jesus at the wedding of Cana, the jars of pure water for purification, for cleansing. And to me, their cleansing is, when we come with a brief word of confession and forgiveness, I confess that I am, sinful and unclean. I'm not worthy of Holy Communion. I am not worthy of your love and of your grace. I have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed by what we have done and left undone. So I'm not worthy, but we come to God counting on God's grace. And this is what these people did that weren't ceremoniously clean. And Hezekiah prays for them, and I love this prayer. He says, the good Lord pardon all who set their hearts to seek God, the Lord God of their ancestors, even though not in accordance with the sanctuary's rules of cleanliness. So he prays to God that God will look upon these people with favor and grace, even though they are not in accordance with the sanctuary's cleanliness, and this is what we do too. I mean, we cannot on our own, come to God as guiltless. I mean, we are all guilty. And so anyway, they come and they celebrate the festival, the Feast of the Passover, remembering of the being set free from captivity in Egypt and being set free from so much else. And they have such a good celebration this first 7 days. I mean, this was the Passover. It was a 7-day festival. Even in Jesus' day, it was a 7-day festival. But they decide to observe for a second week as well. And they do that. Verse 23, the whole assembly agreed together to keep the festival for another 7 days. So they kept it with gladness. For King Hezekiah of Judah gave the assembly, the necessary sacrificial animals and everything for that. And, it talks about bulls and sheep, but, in the Passover, it was a lamb, to take this lamb. And so here but he gave 1,000 bulls as well. So they all stay there, and even the resident aliens who came out of the land of Egypt. And there was great joy in Jerusalem, says for the first time since Solomon had been king, there had been nothing like this. And then in chapter 31, Hezekiah instructs the people to remember that they are to give tithes and offerings to the temple, to God that way. And it is through these tithes and offerings that the Levites and the priests are supported. The Levites and priests don't have land, they don't have flocks, they're dependent upon the people that they serve for their living, for their food, for everything that they have. So the people begin to respond, and they come with their tithes and their offerings of money, of sheep, of cattle, of whatever it might be, to the extent that they have an excess. It says that they begin to pile up after 3 months, and after 7 months they've got a tremendous amount of excess. And Hezekiah then says, build up some rooms for storing this, rather than just having it piled someplace, have it organized and to distribute this. And this was a part of the Levites' responsibility as well, was to make sure that other people, had what they needed to take care of the widow and the orphan and those less fortunate. And they did all of those things. And in chapter 31, it talks about, getting the names of all of the people written down again, in all of these orders and stuff, not really a census, so to say, to speak, but a recording of who the priests are, and tracking them in Aaron's family, in this Levitical family that way. And we end our reading today with Hezekiah doing all of this throughout Judah. It says he did what was good and right and faithful before the Lord his God. And the very last verse I'm going to read to you, I enjoy this as well. Every work he undertook in the service of the house of God and in accordance with the law and commandments to seek his God, he did with all his heart, and he prospered. And, one of the other kings, it says he followed God, but not with all of his heart. So here he did with all of his heart. He was 100% faithful as he could be anyway. And in his worshiping of God, as his following God, of his encouraging people to follow God, and the reopening, and not the rebuilding of the temple and everything, but the reopening of the temple and the calling the people to remember the Passover, to remember God and to seek God's favor was a big thing. And and he did it with all of his heart. So he loved God and he loved his people, and he served both faithfully and well. And that's what God asks us as well, to love God and to love our fellow man and to serve as best we can.